Good afternoon. Let's do some business. We are doing it live right here, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons. We get right down to business with the news-driven hour right after Ben Shapiro and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz. Mottek On Money at 4, live on the air here on 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com and your on-demand Mottek On Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple, iTunes, all your favorite podcast platforms. Stocks ending mixed today to kick off what's going to be a busy week with several of the big tech companies coming in with earnings news. The Fed's interest rate decision will be out this week, too, and the big enchilada monthly economic reports. The jobs report for the month of July will also be coming out, all due later this week. Shares of Tesla moving up sharply today. Google's parent company, Alphabet, moving up sharply as well. Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, all in the plus column today, posting more modest gains, while NVIDIA did slip more than $1 today. The Magnificent One's now around 111 and change. Investors this week will be watching for Amazon, Apple, Meta, and Microsoft to release their quarterly earnings news, and looks like it could be a make-or-break week as investors await more earnings from those big tech companies. Also, the Federal Reserve's interest rate decision, which we'll be getting on Wednesday in a full-blown news conference from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell, and the jobs report will be coming out this Friday. The Dow coming in for a closing loss of 49 points. The S&P 500 eked out a closing gain of 4, and the NASDAQ gained 12 points. Over the weekend, Republican presidential nominee President Trump said that he would build a strategic Bitcoin reserve if he wins the U.S. presidential election in November. The president also said he would immediately appoint a Bitcoin and crypto presidential advisory council upon taking office if he wins re-election. President Trump making the comments on Saturday during a keynote speech at the Bitcoin conference in Nashville in his latest gesture to embrace the crypto industry after he switched gears in his stance on crypto, having criticized it in the past. President Trump allowing his campaign to accept donations in crypto since May and met with executives at crypto mining companies last month. This according to MarketWatch. Meanwhile, today, President Biden announced what he called his plan to reform the U.S. Supreme Court. Vice President Harris, now the presumptive Democratic Party presidential nominee, quickly endorsed the proposed changes. Biden making the announcement at an event commemorating the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Biden appearing at the LBJ Presidential Library, named after former President Lyndon Baines Johnson. I'll discuss all of that with Anastasia coming up today, civil rights attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation, where she focuses on economic opportunity and equality before the law. Occidental Petroleum said today it's agreed to sell Delaware Basin assets in Texas and New Mexico to Permian Resources. This is a big deal in the oil patch, valued at about $818 million. The energy giant, in which Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway famously has a big stake, said it separately completed other asset sales totaling about $152 million. Houston-based Occidental said the $970 million of proceeds would be used to reduce debt. Oil futures, meanwhile, settling lower today, stretching their losses in the wake of 3 consecutive weekly declines as prices fail to hold on to early gains as fears continue over a wider conflict in the Middle East between Israel and Hezbollah. This week's petroleum supply report, we'll be watching for that on Wednesday, and the outcome of the meeting Thursday of major oil producers, OPEC Plus, will also be in focus. We saw the price of oil lower today by $1.35 to $75.81 a barrel. That's the lowest since early June. And Brent crude in London, the global benchmark, moved lower as well, down $1.35 to $79.78 a barrel. Ford recently reported eye-popping losses in its electric vehicle division. Ford says it lost $132,000 on each electric vehicle it sold in the first quarter of the year, but the company still posted a net income of $1.3 billion because of its gas-powered and hybrids, bringing enough cash to cover the losses from its EVs. Another report finds in the next 10 years, EV owners might find themselves waiting up to an hour to get a chance to charge the cars unless the number of fast charging stations increases dramatically in the coming decades. President Trump, meanwhile, is vowed to end the EV mandate. I'll discuss all things EV and car biz this afternoon with our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach, and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, and the whole works. This earnings parade continuing. Joining us live now, Bryan Perry, Chief Investment Strategist and Portfolio Manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com. He's also the author of the 25% Cash Machine. Bryan, great to have you with us to kick off the week here for a change. Give us your assessment of things here at the moment.
Thank you, Frank. It's an interesting month of July here shaping up. It's started out pretty strong, and then we went through the last 3 weeks here of a pretty sharp correction here in the NASDAQ and the Mag 7 stocks here, with the earnings season really all about it this week here. As you mentioned, the employment numbers, we've got the Fed, we've got a lot of things happening that are going to be, it's a pivotal week for the stock market here. And normally in the summertime, people like not have to pay that kind of attention to it, but it is what it is. The Trump trade is on. Despite the fact that most of the New York Times and Gallup polls and things like that are showing a 2 to 3 point spread between Donald Trump leading Kamala Harris, Wall Street sees it quite differently. It's roughly in the terms of how the Wall Street is betting here, it's about a 65% chance that Donald Trump's going to be the next president here, and about a 35% chance that Kamala Harris has a shot. So you can read basically the major polls, but here, when it comes to how Wall Street bets with its money, it's got its money on Donald Trump. So excuse me. This week here we saw the market is still responding negatively to kind of a downbeat set of earnings here from Tesla and Alphabet here, which came in a little bit light of expectations here. And Tesla here has certainly had a nice pop today. A lot of that's based off on the fact that their robotaxi, as well as their energy systems, their battery storage systems for residential and commercial are doing quite well. So that's come around, and Google had a nice day here after consolidating, and for the last 2 or 3 days here, and it's just a huge week for the bulls here for big cap tech. It's what we're doing here is we're seeing upwards of $200 billion of capital being invested into artificial intelligence here this year alone, artificial intelligence infrastructure, and it's very typical for this for the summer to see a pullback in the leading names like this, which have had a fabulous front end of the year, Frank. But now we've had this sharp correction here of the last 3 weeks, and I find it to be, quite frankly, very healthy and constructive. AI is absolutely the biggest investment cycle I've seen in my career, and a little bit of skepticism in the AI trade actually, I think, helps keep things in check. So I'm okay with all this, that it didn't get so out of bounds euphoric here, like it was starting to look like it was going to, coming into the summer here. The biggest spenders in AI, are determined to be at the leading edge here, and that's we're talking about Microsoft, Google, Meta, Amazon, Oracle, Tesla, Apple. They are committing huge, vast numbers of money into making sure that they are out front in this whole AI trade. So, despite the fact that there's been this great rotation, going on here that's been so highly touted about, out of big cap tech and into small cap, I would be careful there. I would be using this pullback in the big cap tech area, Frank, to look at the best names here coming into earnings here. I think that, when they run these types of stocks up into their numbers and then they release the numbers, then there's usually selling on the news. There's been selling on the rumor, and I think there will be buying on the news going forward here. So these are some of these are the most profitable companies in the world, and they're disciplined, and they have the capital to lead the next technology revolution. Frank.
On there live with Bryan Perry, investment expert at mintassetmanagement.com. And Bryan, thanks very much for that thorough assessment. Many of our guests here on this program have been souring on the Magnificent Seven lately, so thanks for chiming in on all of that. And certainly crypto getting a lot of attention over the weekend at that big Bitcoin conference in Nashville, where former President Trump made a speech and made promises, including that it would be the policy, if he's reelected, policy of the U.S. to keep 100% of the Bitcoins the U.S. government currently holds or requires in the future, and he would immediately appoint a Bitcoin and Crypto Presidential Advisory Council upon taking office. I know you watch what's happening in the cryptos. We did see Bitcoin get a bit of a pop on that over the weekend. Right now it's back above 67,000 here. What's your reaction to what former President Trump had to say and what's happening in the crypto space now?
Well, it seems like he's hedging his bets here. He knows that the deficit is really spiraling higher, and it's not like he doesn't love to spend money, because he does. That's one thing about Donald Trump that I wish he would spend more time at, in terms of fiscal policy and how we're going to pay down our debt and still do a reasonable job of managing government. So I think that Bitcoin, which is the lead dog in this whole crypto race, is certainly in a longer-term consolidation phase than most people had expected. You can go back to March or February, actually, when Bitcoin was at 60,000, and it's been bouncing between 60,000 and 70,000 since February. So this is a long phase. But, in technical analysis, Frank, the longer the base, the bigger the rally. And I think the least path of resistance for Bitcoin is higher, especially now that you have Donald Trump is looking to endorse this as a core asset, and I think this is really where you're going to get a big tailwind from this. And we had a pop here last week that got close to 70,000 on these headlines and all that. But at the same time, bear in mind that Trump, Wall Street is betting on Trump, and therefore it really bodes well for, I think, investors here that are looking for an alternative gold and a dollar hedge to look at Bitcoin here as on any pullbacks here. We could see another pullback as much as to 60,000 again. Maybe 55 is really kind of the baseline level here. That's a good place to start, looking at adding and initiating positions.
Very interesting. And before we get your picks here on where you're putting money and taking off the table, let me ask you about the home builders, which rallied today. We see the yield in the 10-year note, which impacts the fixed-rate mortgage rates, moving lower lately, and today at 4.18%. And we have this Fed decision coming up on Wednesday, in which they'll announce whether the short-term rates will be held steady or what's going to happen. We'll find out on Wednesday when we hear directly from the Fed Chairman, Jerome Powell. Any surprises expected on Wednesday, and what are we expecting here as far as any possible change in Fed policy and any movement on the benchmark Fed funds rate this week?
It really doesn't look like the bond vigilantes and the bond traders and the bond futures traders are all about seeing the Fed actually move this week. We didn't see a low enough number. Had we seen a negative number last week in the PCE number, Frank, I think we might have had a shot at maybe a quarter point cut here for July. But now I think you're going to see a hold fast to the current 5.25%, 5.5% Fed funds rate, and then with the Fed giving a dovish statement. So I think that there's still a chance for a September, November, December rate cut cycle here as we get into the latter part of the year. But the market, as long as the market knows that the Fed is committed to that, then that's very bullish for the market in general. And you said to the home builders, they certainly were moving on this type of this narrative here, whether it's Pulte or D.R. Horton or NVR and the other big names, Toll Brothers, and Taylor Morrison. These are all companies that are, and they're actually bringing on a lot more supply because commodities, lumber and cement and all types of base commodities have come down in price. So their margins are fattening up, and hopefully they can bring on a lot more supply, which this country needs because of the lack of supply that was during the whole COVID situation. It's important that we get back to a balance of supply and demand here, because prices are just too high for most people to, especially for new household formation is having a really tough time looking at first-time home buying. So I like the setup here, and the home buyers were consolidating again for the last 5 to 6 months, and they're breaking out here based upon the fact that their input costs are coming down, and they're going to be able to offer homes for hopefully less than what they've been having to charge here for the last 2 years.
All right, and the home builders, of course, also include LA-based KB Home, headquartered in Westwood, just past their headquarters building today there on Wilshire Boulevard. And at this point, Brian Perry, let me ask you, any specific places where you are putting money now and or taking off the table?
Well, you do look for sectors of the market, Frank, that are leveraged to a lower interest rate environment here, and certainly that's the small caps. The IWM, which is the Russell 2000 here, that's the ETF, currently trading at 221. That's a laggard, from the standpoint of the S&P, the Dow, and the NASDAQ. So you've got an index here which is trading roughly 11 times earnings. and is going to probably have earnings growth higher, 700-800 basis points higher than the S&P. So there could be a slingshot trade here where you could see the Russell 2000 move up 20% or even better here between now and the end of the year. That's a huge comeback trade here for the IWM Russell 2000. So take a look at that. Certainly private equity here, which is leveraged very heavily into real estate and all kinds of M&A deals here. That's Blackstone and that's KKR. Also, are huge beneficiaries of a lower interest rate environment here. Certainly in the business of technology, I do like this buying into the Microsoft, Amazon, Apple trade right in here this week here. Also, Corning's going to be out tomorrow. They already raised their guidance here.
Welcome to Talkville, the ultimate Smallville rewatch podcast. Well, let's get into season 4, episode 21, Forever.
Is there a button we can hit that just skip
I know.
this one?
What I'm surprised about, and I don't think there's anything he could have done, but James Marshall directed this, and he's directed so many great episodes.
It's collecting the paycheck.
This would have been an epic episode if somehow it was Lex Luthor's high school experience and graduation.
Binge seasons 1 through 4 of Talkville before season 5 begins, wherever you listen.
Coming into this number here, so take a look at GLW, Glowworm, and Arista Networks here, which is certainly one of the premier offerings in the network area here for hardware, ANET, and Spotify. Spotify had great numbers here. You got to love these models here where they're bringing on, really strong new subscriber growth as well as being able to raise prices. That's a real double-barreled, formula for success. So Spotify just shot higher here to almost 350. It's pulled back here to 323. I like Spotify here on a pullback. And also, when you look at real estate here, even though corporate office properties are in deep trouble in a lot of cities, Frank, there's still that is way too early to speculate on that. But self-storage, e-commerce warehouses, healthcare, and data centers. That's all part of what is the XLRE, which is the Spider real estate ETF, XLRE. And that's breaking out because of those particular subcomponents are all doing extremely well here. Coming off, airlines. Airlines are starting to now have, all of them are showing bad numbers here, and they're showing signs of having to discount heavily here going in late in the summer here. So that's I think where you just want to avoid. And then certainly with Donald Trump coming into office here, which I think he's probably going to probably end up there, I think that the China trade is definitely off, and he's going to come after China here with both barrels. Frank?
All right, and CrowdStrike, it was just about a week ago when we had that debacle with this IT meltdown, and the airlines were impacted by this, especially Delta. As we heard, we see CrowdStrike shares are rebounding today. Anything that is catching your attention there? What about CrowdStrike here? It has rebounded today. Is it set for a further rebound or what? And are there anything else in that space that's catching your attention?
I think you got to be very careful here. Elon Musk canceled all his CrowdStrike accounts for all his companies, and I think that's a leading indicator here that they are going to have a really hard time retaining good business because you don't get 3 strikes in that business. You get 1. And that's for CrowdStrike here. I think that's an avoid here. Palo Alto Networks is likely to pick up business here, PANW, and that's the other big name in that sector here that I think is probably going to do okay. Checkpoint Software is another one here, Israeli company here, very well run, and Zscaler ZS is another one here too. So if you want to be in that space here, take a look at the alternatives. But I think CrowdStrike's going to have some customer attrition here coming into this quarter here, and it's going to show up in their numbers.
Bryan, thank you very much. As always, terrific assessment of things here, and we appreciate it. And kicking off our new week, Bryan Perry, Chief Investment Strategist and Portfolio Manager at Mint Asset Management at mintassetmanagement.com. He's also the author of the 25% Cash Machine. Bryan, have a great week, and thank you very much for taking the call today.
Thanks, Frank. Let's have a great week.
Mottek On Money continues here at 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Mixed start to the new week on Wall Street with the Dow slipping 49 at 40,540. The S&P 500 managed to hold on to a closing gain of 4 points, and the Nasdaq gained 12. The yield in the 10-year note at 4.18%. It's going to be a busy week, as we just talked about, with investment expert Bryan Perry. Several big tech earnings reports will be coming out this week. We'll have a big Fed decision on interest rates, a statement on the economy, then a full-blown news conference from Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. That'll be happening on Wednesday. And the big enchilada, the monthly economic reports, the jobs report for the month of July will be coming out on Friday. Today we saw Tesla make a nice move higher, more than $12 to $232 and change. Ford slipping into reverse again today after a rough week last week, including its worst one-day sell-off since the financial crisis of 2008. Ford down 18 cents at 11.01. A lot of attention focused on how much money Ford is losing on its electric vehicles. In fact, an eye-popping number per vehicle. They are losing something like $130,000 per electric vehicle. Ford says it lost $132,000 on each electric vehicle it sold in the first quarter of this year. But by the way, the company still posted a net income of $1.3 billion because of its gas-powered vehicles as well as hybrids. We'll be talking more about that later this hour with our go-to car expert, Lauren Finks. NVIDIA, the Magnificent One, down $1.47 today at $111.59. Apple up slightly, up 28 cents at $2.18 and change. Taking a look at CrowdStrike, up today nearly $3, back to $258.81. Occidental Petroleum slipping 36 cents at $60.18. It was involved in a big deal today in the oil patch. Oxy says it's agreed to sell Delaware Basin assets in Texas and New Mexico to Permian Resources in a deal valued at about $818 million. In the crypto space, we see a Bitcoin right now down about 100 at 67,100. Ethereum down 12 at 3,315. And Doge at the moment at 13 cents. Gold moving higher, up nearly $3 at 2,427 and change. And silver up 18 cents at 28.05. Mottek On Money continues here, 790 KBC. Former President Trump getting lots of attention over the weekend at a Bitcoin conference in Nashville, Tennessee, where he got a lot of cheers talking about Bitcoin and other cryptos. And looks like he's now allowing his campaign to accept donations in crypto, by the way. Also met with executives recently at the crypto mining companies. He's promised to, if elected, that he will make sure that the U.S. keeps 100% of the Bitcoins the U.S. government currently holds. Today, President Biden also in the spotlight, announcing what he called his plan to reform the U.S. Supreme Court. Vice President Harris, now the presumptive Democratic Party presidential nominee, quickly endorsing the proposed changes rolled out by Biden today. President Biden making the announcement at an event commemorating the 60th anniversary of the signing of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. President Biden appearing at the LBJ Presidential Library. Bringing in now live as ANASTASIA BODEN, civil rights attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation, where she focuses on economic opportunity and equality before the law. Anastasia, thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
All right, give us your reaction to the Biden announcement today.
Well, my reaction is that there's a lot of political grandstanding going on, and if Biden truly cares about depoliticizing the court and reinstating the public's faith in the court, then he would stop politicizing it. And if you take a look at the past term, there's a lot of things the court did that actually illustrate that it has more commonalities than usual among the justices, more unanimous cases than usual. Almost half of cases were unanimous. It's taking fewer cases than usual, which means it's not some overeager, overreaching court. And the cases themselves are really nuanced. And so I think there's a lot of misinformation going on about how the court actually operates and how it's turning out to be, despite the 6-3 composition that has the left characterizing the court as some sort of conservative monolith.
On the air live this afternoon with one of the experts on all of this, Anastasia Boden, civil rights attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation. The Biden announcement today following the recent Supreme Court 6-3 decision, by the way, to grant presidents broad immunity from prosecution for crimes committed in office. What about that important ruling, and what practical effect do you think it'll have?
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it was a divisive case, but it's a little unfair to characterize it, as Biden does, as imposing virtually no immunity for presidents. That's just not true. All 9 justices agreed that for unofficial acts, at least, there will be liability. But when it comes to official acts, there's gradations of liability. Now, some of the courts said that if it's a core act of the president, then there's absolute.
It's kickoff time, and Believe podcasts are here to get you ready for the season.
This team, they looked to figure it out, and they said, okay, we got a shot at this thing.
With Believe, you get immediate reactions, game previews, and expert analysis from all 32 teams, plus all of your favorite college teams.
This is a true junior that we're talking about.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
The running was good. His size is unbelievable.
Just search Believe. That's BLEAV podcast, wherever you listen.
Immunity, but where it's a non-core act, there's merely a presumption of immunity. And Biden goes ahead and characterizes all of this as saying, oh, well, the Supreme Court has completely ruled this radical decision that's going to leave presidents with no authority except for himself. And that's just not true. And I think we need more time to see how the standard that the court set out plays out in the lower courts. For example, President Trump's case is going to be remanded back down to the district courts, and we will see ultimately whether he is found liable for some of his acts or none of his acts or all of his acts or what have you. But it's just premature and I think unfair to characterize that decision as imposing no liability at all and complete immunity for presidents.
All right, and so it looks like we've already heard from the Republican House leader on Biden's call for a constitutional amendment, which Biden has called the "No One Is Above the Law" amendment. He said it was dead on arrival. The Republican leader did, right? So, is that you share that view as well?
I think a lot of this probably is political grandstanding because, for example, one of the suggestions that Biden had, as you said, was an explicit constitutional amendment. That's very difficult to do. The Constitution sets out the process for amending the Constitution. It takes a lot of votes. It's a very high burden. And so almost certainly you can propose any constitutional amendment knowing that there's no political capital to actually do it. It's just something you say to kind of rally the base. So yeah, I think that part is dead on arrival. But there are other things that President Biden suggested. He suggested term limits. He suggested an ethics codes. And I think those things also not only will face some staunch opposition, but really have no basis to begin with, that we shouldn't even be talking about the court in this way.
Yeah, what about, as you point out, Biden calling for term limits and going as far as to say he supports a system in which the president would appoint a justice every 2 years to spend 18 years in active service on the Supreme Court. What do you think of that idea?
Yeah, well, as far as all of the proposed reforms go, I think term limits are less offensive than others. A lot of people have suggested just straight packing the court, increasing the number right now while Biden's in office or when the next Democratic president is in office. And I think that's a really bad idea. I think term limits are less of a bad idea, although still problematic. But rather than even debating these ideas, again, I think we should go back and look at why these proposals are even being made. And I don't think they're being made because there's something actually fundamentally wrong with the court right now. I don't think the court is functioning poorly. I think people are unhappy with the court's decisions. And that's not a good enough reason to go and tinker with our constitutional system and to really politicize the court even further. I think what we should be doing, if we really care right now about people's trust in the institution, is to be emphasizing all of the nuance that there is in these Supreme Court opinions and all the interesting ways in which some of the justices agree with each other in ways that you wouldn't expect, like the January 6th case where we had Justice Jackson, for example, voting with the conservatives and Justice Barrett crossing over and dissenting with the liberals. So it's just, we need to take a more nuanced view of the court before we even go making any of these proposals to begin with.
All right. And last but not least, the third thing he suggested was calling for a binding code of conduct for the U.S. Supreme Court, noting every other federal judge is bound by an enforceable code of conduct. What about a code of conduct, formal code of conduct for the U.S. Supreme Court justices?
Well, I think once again, it's important to step back and ask, why is this being proposed? President Biden says that the justices are suffering from an ethics crisis. But if you look at it, a lot of those accusations about the various justices receiving supposed gifts or what have you, they don't have a lot of substance. So much has been made over Justice Thomas's friendship, for example, with the businessman Harlan Crow. But none of these critics, and certainly not even President Biden in his op-ed, can point to any case or any instance where they think Justice Thomas actually traded his vote or voted in a way where he otherwise wouldn't have, but for some gift from Harlan Crow. So before, again, we go imposing any of these new ethics codes, then we can debate the merits of various ethics codes. But what about go back to the root of the problem and asking whether there is a problem to begin with? I don't think so. I think it's really the justices have been treated really unfairly. Justice Thomas is widely regarded as one of the most consistent justices. The court's very transparent in its reasoning. Justice Thomas is always issuing additional separate opinions to explain his views. And so to call him, as somehow compromised by his friendship with Harlan Crow, I think is just deeply unfair and calls into question why we're having any of these ethics proposals to begin with, when those proposals suggest that there's something wrong with the court, that the court's inherently corrupt. They further destabilize the court rather than bringing out the facts and bolstering the reputation of the court.
Anastasia, thank you very much for sharing your legal analysis with us. As always, Anastasia Boden, civil rights attorney at Pacific Legal Foundation, where she specializes in economic opportunity and equality before the law. Thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Good afternoon. Ford in the spotlight recently, reporting an eye-popping loss in its EV division. Ford said it lost $132,000 on each electric vehicle it sold in the first quarter of this year. But the company still posted a net income of $1.3 billion, mainly because of its gas-powered and hybrids, bringing enough cash to cover the losses from its EVs. Another report finds in the next 10 years, EV owners might find themselves waiting up to an hour to get a chance to charge their cars unless the number of fast charging stations increases dramatically in the coming decades. President Trump, meanwhile, vowing to end the EV mandate. Let's bring in now our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast. Lauren, thanks very much for taking the call. First, on this Ford news, give us your reaction to that.
Well, it's no surprise. I've been saying all along that all the car manufacturers are taking a loss. General Motors has changed their tune, as well as almost every single brand has changed their tune. The only one that hasn't yet is Jaguar. They're going to keep their F-Pace, which is their larger size SUV, as gas hybrid, essentially with a 48-volt architecture, which means it's got that assisted electric boost. Everything else is going to go electric. It's extremely concerning for a brand that's struggling as it is. You can tell right now as you go by dealer lots that people are buying electric cars. They're sitting there, and those that have purchased them, about 50% have said we're not going to go back to electric cars because they don't want to sit in line and wait. And these are problems. So if that type of thing, word spreads quickly, as we all know, frustration of a vehicle or a brand or of a situation, people will always tell you quicker than something that's good. And the result of that has been, although the media has been pushing very hard on electric vehicles, even we're going to end this mandate. You can't force people to buy things. And any time that I post a story about electric vehicles and what's going on, people are like, I'm not buying one. I'm not going to be forced to. They cost more. The charging stations are very frustrating, and some of them don't work. The insurance is higher, and the range is shorter. And, of course, there are times when if there's no electricity, which has just happened in Paris at the Olympics. I'm sure you've discussed that. Well, then there's no way to charge. And no power means no electricity, no distance. And you may say, well, you can't get fuel. But if I fill up my tank in the morning, I still have a full tank the next morning, typically, or pretty close to it. With electricity, if the weather is super cold or super warm, well, you could lose up to half of your charge. That'd be like going to bed and waking up with half a tank of gas. And people aren't going to deal with that.
Too bad nobody thought of this to begin with, right?
Well, I did, as you know, and I've been pushing back.
I know. I'm just kidding.
About 15 years. Yeah.
Yeah. Of course. No, it's all excellent points. And here we are, fast forward to the present. And it looks like it's only set to get worse, right? With this other report I mentioned, in the next 10 years, EV owners might find themselves waiting up to an hour. Can you imagine that? Waiting up to an hour to get a chance to charge their vehicles unless the number of fast charging stations increases dramatically. What about that part of the equation?
That's a huge part, especially in LA, where a lot of people have gone to electric vehicles for their first or second or third vehicle. And the problem is, when you see this the most is during the holidays, whether it be Thanksgiving or Christmas or New Year's, any holiday, 4th of July, Labor Day, the lineup for people to charge because they all want to charge to go somewhere or do something, and then the line is long, or if one charger is not working, it just makes it worse. In Chicago during the winter, we saw that people just abandoned, and that would be a problem if you went there thinking, well, I've got, at 25 miles till the charge is out and you're waiting in line, you're going to have to keep moving your vehicle forward. At some point, you're going to be out of juice, essentially. And I think people get very frustrated. And if you have to wait an hour, that is definitely going to hurt sales. I still think that electric vehicles have a place. And I still believe that if you want one, you should be able to buy one, but it shouldn't be mandated.
All right. And what about in flood-prone areas where people in Florida this year were standing in water, holding that electric plug and trying to plug in their vehicles unsuccessfully? What about plugging in vehicles in those conditions?
It's extremely dangerous. I was actually in Naples, Florida during the last hurricane, and any vehicle that was exposed to water, was in a flood, or halfway up the wheels, in other words, just about where you enter the vehicle, if water's up to that point, that means all those batteries have been sitting in salt water. And the result of what that really means is that it kills the battery, and there's no way to save it, especially if it's salt water from the ocean. It's just done. So, and plus we don't know what's in the water when it floods. You could be in downtown LA and say, now it's suddenly flooding, but where's that water? Was it sewage? And is there E. coli? Is there mold? And these are problems that happens with every car. Gasoline-powered cars can be fixed. Electric cars are just done.
All right. It's been a while since we talked about car prices, but anecdotally, are they coming down now? Used car prices, especially, Lauren. And what's your guidance for anyone that is interested in getting an EV? Are there any bargains at this point?
There are a lot of EV bargains. If you think, I want an electric car, I'm getting all kinds of incentives, and it works for my lifestyle. Hertz is trying to get rid of all of their electric vehicles. People aren't renting them. And there's also that $7,500 tax credit that is eligible to you, plus the state has credits. I believe California might be out of funds for that, but definitely check with the county and the company you work for. And one of the interesting things is you can probably pick up a Hertz, depending on whether it's a Model 3 or an S, depending on what it is, for substantially less than you can get it anywhere else. So people that do want electric cars, I say go to Hertz used cars. You will be pleasantly pleased at the price of a vehicle.
Terrific, Lauren. Thank you very much for taking the call this afternoon. That is our go-to car expert, Lauren Fix, editor-in-chief of Car Coach and the co-host of the Total Car Score podcast, live with us here on Mottek On Money on 790 KABC. Stay tuned now for the 790 KABC News Blitz with Randy Wang, and I'll be back tomorrow at more at 4 right here, Mottek On Money, 790 KABC.
It's kickoff time, and Believe podcasts are here to get you ready for the season.
This team, they looked to figure it out, and they said, okay, we got a shot at this thing.
With Believe, you get immediate reactions, game previews, and expert analysis from all 32 teams, plus all of your favorite college teams.
This is a true junior that we're talking about.
Sideline to sideline, end zone to end zone.
The running was good. His size is unbelievable.
Just search Believe. That's BLEAV podcast, wherever you listen.